Hello and welcome to Story Radio, the podcast for readers, writers and lovers of literature everywhere. Thank you so much for coming to the Story Radio Writers Salon. I'm Tabitha and this is Martin. We're the co-hosts of the show, and we're very excited to have you all here for our first live podcast event. We've got some wonderful writers here for you all to listen to. We will be recording this event and you'll be able to listen to it on our podcast later this year, provided the sound is all right. And so I'd like to introduce our first writer, Kristin Burniston. Kristin is a graduate of the MA Screenwriting programme at the University of the Arts, London. In 2023, her short film scripts, Tree and Hairy Mary, were selected by the City of Angels Film Festival, the Women Over 50 Film Festival, and Best Scripts London. This year, Hairy Mary made it to the finals for the Slip Film Fund, and both Tree and Hairy Mary have reached the semi-finals of the Go Creator short film competition. Kristin's currently working on a children's animation set in London, a crime fiction TV series, and a feature film script based on her novel. Tonight, she'll be reading an extract from this novel. In fact, she won't be, as she has a sore throat. So the actor Dan Delarmotte has agreed to read in her place.
That's me.
Hi Dan, thank you for stepping in. Do you want to come on up and read here?
Thank you, Dan. You're so much prettier than I am.
Oh, stop.
Thank you.
Don't stop.
No, I'm always going to get gorgeous people to read for.
From the start, Aggie admired how Kristina stood out from their fellow students in her figure-hugging black dress, Dr. Martens lace-up boots, and torn fishnet tights that caressed her shapely legs. Kristina's allure was striking. She was the object of dreams to most of the student population and all the teaching staff. On the rare occasion her hair wasn't slicked back into a sleek ponytail, it was in short braids that provided a sharp punctuation to her beautiful, perfectly symmetrical face. She wore horn-rimmed glasses that sat on her high cheekbones and framed her cat-like eyes. Both men and women fell head over heels in love with her. They followed wherever she went, all bloodhounds on her scent, a mixture of opium by Yves Saint Laurent, tobacco, and pheromones. Aggie was not immune to her charms. She wasn't sure why Kristina chose her out of everyone. Kristina often told her it was because of her style, and later because of her otherworldliness and deep intelligence. Flattered as she was, Aggie never knew what to say to this, and so she said nothing. To her, Kristina was the height of sophistication and beauty. Her life to date so different from her own. Over steaming hot espressos in Bar Italia in Dean Street, she came to learn that Kristina was born and raised just off Portobello Road, West London. It was a modest but vibrant community, neighbour to both Paddington Bear and Mick Jagger. Her childhood took place against the backdrop of stores and pubs that prominently displayed signs that declared, "No blacks, no dogs, no Irish." This was inconvenient for Kristina, as she is both black and Irish, her mother being from County Cork and her father from Ghana. Being from London, Kristina did not care about the other students, mostly home counties kids with trust funds. A world away from her Portobello, they considered Kristina exotic, or, when someone wanted to get into her knickers, sun-kissed. Although they thought themselves to be sophisticated, Kristina knew them to be parochial. On the rare occasion Aggie sought reassurance in their friendship, Kristina would observe that every student considered themselves to be a genius, spending their spare time fencing with their quick wit, dominating with their superior intellect, and leading with their far-reaching creative vision. If they failed, it was the fault of the audience, not the artist. Back then, Kristina was serious about fashion design, almost as serious as she was about having fun. As Aggie was introverted and Kristina extroverted, their personalities formed a balanced friendship. Most days went into nights and straight back into days, a blur of dancing, drinking, and smoking. Kristina enjoyed showing Aggie the debauched delights of Soho. Being young and beautiful, men fell over themselves to be the first to treat them, hoping this might increase their luck later that evening. Kristina taught Aggie how to accept these gifts whilst giving nothing in return. It was an exhilarating time. Life seemed full of possibilities. What happened? Fancying themselves as hedonists, Aggie and Kristina frequented the colony rooms to observe Soho's old guard and listen to their recounted tales of drunken misdeeds and alcoholic self-harm. The club was full of old queens and dykes, butch and femme, everyone seeming terribly, frightfully posh, no matter their background. It did not matter where they came from, it was that they were here now. Francis Bacon hung out there, and so did everyone else, although most patrons were artists in life instead of practice. Hilarity ensued until someone in a drunken stupor would pick a fight or break down sobbing, often at the same time. Aggie and Kristina would stay until late, allowing some old, sloshed aristocrat to buy them drinks in return for an audience. After many G&Ts, he would regale them with tales of his youth, complete with commentary of his unique genius and sensuous beauty, missed opportunities, slights given and received, and prison sentences narrowly escaped. Often skint, they would hang out at Kristina's bedsit at number 9 Coptic Street, Bloomsbury. Except for a pre-operative transsexual in her 20s, her neighbours were pensioners who had been sharing the only loo in the building for 40 years or more. Despite this, Kristina considered herself lucky that she had a bathtub to herself, which, after a night on the Blue Nun, Aggie painted, covering its ancient chips with red lips, courtesy of Barry M. At times, with only her own company for entertainment, Kristina would set out on foot towards St. James's Park, searching for furniture discarded in skips to keep or sell on. Successful more times than not, she would ask builders to carry these salvaged pieces back to her flat, all for the promise of a cup of tea. 1.5 miles and up 3 flights of narrow steps, the builders never grumbled as to walk behind her, watching her shapely legs and voluptuous backside ascend the staircase was worth any amount of back pain. On sunny, summery days, Aggie and Kristina would camp out on number 9's tar-covered flat roof. Kristina would strip off to her bra and pants, laying down several blankets so as to not burn her back. Aggie, wanting to preserve her paleness, sat under a parasol, sweating into her all-weather black dress, which, according to Kristina, made her look like a post-punk suffragette. When the last glimmer of light shone on the horizon, they would descend down the stairs for a wee break. A jumper each, a bottle of wine and a packet of fags, they would return to the roof to drink and light up. They passed their days and nights like this, following their own natural rhythm. If they were in the American South, they would live to the beat of circadian rhythms. But London ran on pigeon time, their coos announcing the dawn spent after a night of scavenging rubbish and taking breadcrumbs from the hands of gullible tourists. And what do art students do for money? In their first year at St. Martin's, Aggie and Kristina lived off their student grants with no thought of how to replenish them until they realised they were down to their last pound. This required urgent action. On that day, as they made their way to class, they spotted an index card on the notice board with the hand-scrawled message, "Life drawing needs sitters." And that was how, on Friday, 10th of May, 1985, they found themselves working as models. Looking around the room full of men, all stirring their paints and adjusting their easels, Aggie began to question all of her life choices. Remind me, how did we get here? Because we're skint. Within seconds, Kristina stripped off and dropped her clothes. As she bent to pick them up, the room took a collective intake of breath. Straightening up, shoulders back into a perfect posture, Kristina curtsied, providing a garden view with full foliage. The sound of paintbrushes dropping reverberated around the room. In the far corner, facing the wall, Aggie undressed, removing the less revealing pieces first, taking care to fold and place each item on the table adjacent. Christina skipped to her stool. Aggie shuffled, wishing for the first time in her life that her hands were larger, inadequate as they were proving to be in covering her modesty. The stool was tall and cold, forcing Aggie to perch in a way that pushed her hips forward. With her buttocks on its edge, her hand on its hard seat, one foot on the floor and the other balanced on the stool's low wooden bar, Aggie bent her knees in a way that she hoped appeared casual. Perhaps it was this unnatural angle of her hips, or the cold air on her bare bottom, or the fever from her rising anxiety from being naked in a room full of clothed men. Maybe it was the egg sandwich she'd had for lunch, or that extra cup of tea, or the bottle of wine from last night. Or perhaps it was a combination of all of these things that made Aggie fart. Mortified, she bloomed to Rose's door. The colour started at her scalp, making its way down her body to her size 6 feet. The fart was loud. It smelt. It was obviously hers. Aggie desperately hoped that her arse didn't visibly shake from the fart's vibration. After what seemed to be an eternity, the class finished. She tried to stand up, keeping as much dignity as possible. Once dressed, the tutor handed over her fee. She wondered if this is how prostitutes felt.
Thank you, Dan, for reading it so beautifully. I could tell the age difference though, because it's espressos, and so I have got time. EX, not espressos. But thank you. You did a better job than I could have done. You're lovely.
I'd like to introduce Lindsay Gillespie. Lindsay was born in South Wales and lives in the South Downs. She's been a graphic designer and illustrator, lived in New Delhi, Washington DC, France, taught English in Tokyo, and she enrolled in the creative writing program at the New Writing South. She writes short and not so short fiction. She was Costa 2021 Short Story Award finalist. A year later, she was finalist in the group report competition, and she's been in lots of other competitions and done very well. So, thank you. Please, go ahead.
Thank you, Martin. I usually love the sound of my own voice, but let's see tonight if I Right. So I'm going to read a whole story from beginning to end. The last year the ice lake sang. How much does an eyelash weigh? Both his eyelids are bald now, and this is his last one. A tonsil weighs 1.5 grams, approximately. Last week they sliced out his tonsils and pulled out 2 molars. The doctors at the clinic believe they mess with the body's natural healing, and he's asked for them back. The molars have patterns on them like ripples. They look like tiny shells. He remembers when he used to pick up shells at Black Sand Beach and Lime Key on the other side of the world. His toenails. He peeled them off this morning before the doctors could. Something he can still do himself because he has the right. This body is still his. He has his shiny sky blue Delta toiletry bag from the flight where he's keeping the little bits of himself. A relic box. Eyelashes, toenails, and 2 molars. They haven't given him back his tonsils, not yet. So the weighing scales say 88 pounds. It's about what his 12-year-old weighs, give or take. And he will weigh 82 pounds, 3 ounces on the day he dies. He has this rule, but today he breaks it and looks in the mirror. The more he shrinks, the longer his locks sprout. The doctor says, "They must be weighing you down," and he flips them up in the old man's face. He says, "They power me up, they make me electric. You know what? You know I've been shot, right? I nearly died, right? And he saved me. They stopped the bullets meant for my heart. No one gets to touch them, only God." Next day he finds a lock crushed on his pillow, and he lays it lengthways in the Delta bag. The old doctor does the rounds every morning with the young doctor. They add, they divide and subtract the numbers his body is making. Every day there's a new plan for this, for that. Today both doctors are shooting sweet smiles at him. "How about we take some blood today, clean it up, stick it back in?" "Nice try," he says. They say they're concerned he's not eating. "What can we tempt you with?" they go. "Island food," he says. "Yeah, dasheen and a bit of Irish moss, a cup of Irish moss." And it takes them 5 days to fly the Irish moss and his island food, 5,000 miles from Kingston to Munich. And the trouble is snowstorms, and not in Germany. Like freak snowstorms in Jamaica have paralysed the airport and shut it down, and that's that first time in 30 years. And while he's waiting, they pump infusions into his arms. 17 vitamins and 21 minerals. Heike is the night shift nurse. White eyelashes and a blonde moustache. She's all business, threading the IV tubes, cleaning, wiping. She's built big, with muscles in her cheeks. When she's done his chart, she wheels the bed around to face the window and drags up a chair, and they sit side by side. She turns the monitor's lights down low, and the two of them stare out into the night, like they're sitting on a train. "So tell me where we're going tonight," she says. They make these little window trips all over. He chooses a destination: Tokyo, Dakar, Addis, London and Kingston. There have been 1 or 2 football trips to watch Tottenham Hotspur. He does the commentaries, with Heike chiming in. Their faces float in the window like 2 moons. His is a dark moon, hers a ghost moon. And the real moon flies about outside. Tonight is the first time he hasn't named a destination. He's just sitting there, and he hasn't said a word. Outside, a pine tree twitches to shake off the snow. He holds his hand up. "Hear that? What's that?" "It's a bird," says Heike. "A nice bird. They come with the snow, and they stay all winter till the thaw." He asks Heike where the icebirds live. "At the ice lake. At the end of her shift," she says, Kurt picks her up and drives her home across it. That it's forbidden to drive on the ice, she says. "Who's Kurt, your sweetheart?" Heike twiddles her moustache. He is and he isn't," she says. "This town's so dead you wouldn't believe it, and winter here lasts forever." "So Heike, you got to tell me, is it love that you're feeling?" She goes, "Kurt is an Arsch Geiger." "Yeah, all the boys here are." "Arse? Arse what?" "Arsch Geiger, it's not a good word, but it means like he's an arse violin." And it's the first time she sees him throw his head back and laugh, and she can see the sockets in his gums where his back teeth were. "How far's this lake?" he says. 20 minutes. It's special. Bits of it stay frozen right to summer. Summer will arrive 5 weeks after his funeral. "Yeah, take me there. I'm done with window trips," he says. "I step 1 foot on it, it'll know where I'm from and it'll melt. And summer will come early." "Maybe," smiles the girl, "if you do your exercises." Heike heaves him up to standing. There's a big wobble, a littler one, and off they lurch. They step out along the shadowy corridor. At night the clinic is full of dead spaces. And tonight it spooks him and he stops. He tells Heike he wants to go back. There's a surprise waiting. 2 surprises who have smashed his door down. His visitors have flown all the way to see him. They've bought his Gibson Les Paul. In 19 days he'll be buried with it propped in his left hand. And the visitors, they tell him lies, right in his face. You're looking damn fine, they say, and they're all over Heike, asking how the hell you get a party started in this forlorn lockdown permafrost place. Heike vanishes and reappears with boxes of apple saft and the dumplings. The visitors are larky, they tell jokes and stupid stories. He holds up one dumpling to his mouth before hiding it in a tangle of bed sheets. He spills the juice down his front. The visitors plug in tapes. Listen, you heard this? Check this one out. He calls for Heike, get them out of here. She sweeps them out into the corridor, tells them he has to have his bloods done. Yeah, in the middle of the night he has to. They hang in the doorway, yelling blessings at him. Heike thanks him for the visit, and he doesn't look up. The old doctor is away on a big trip to give talks on his newest treatment protocols when his famous patient hemorrhages. From now, all visitors are verboten. He sleeps for 2 days and wakes in the middle of the night of the 3rd. Heike's been waiting, her round face shining like the moon. Her friend Anka, one of the lab nurses, is also in the room. We're going to do a little trip, they say. The 2 nurses dress him and thread his legs into a padded snowsuit. Last thing, Heike pumps his line with a fresh dose of morphine, and they settle him in his wheelchair and bury him under a quilt. They use the back exit. Anka's got Herman, the security guy, to switch the clinic cameras off. Outside, a crumpled blue Opel is waiting, with the engine running, making its own weather, fog and smoke. They lower him into the front seat, and the driver shakes his hand and won't let it go. This is the best night of my life, says Kurt. From the back seat, more handshakes, more introductions, and someone asks for his autograph. We told you, no asking for stuff. Heike's voice is all high and scratchy. Here's fuck-ass Detlef and Uli to come. The girls start cursing out the boys. The front seat passenger says, hey, I don't mind, because he doesn't. The engine fires up and they're off. Crawling along a road of old blue snow. They leave the clinic behind. He can make out church steeples, and he can smell a farm. The one called Detlef says, sorry, bitte, danke, and leans across to feed a cassette into the deck. At -something degrees in the shivering car, they play Could You Be Loved, and on the last chorus the cassette player eats the tape. He opens his mouth to laugh and can't stop coughing. There's a lot of blood on his lips, and Heike leans over to hold the cloth for him, and then the Opel starts to flip-flop. It's the ice lake, says Kurt, we're here. The passenger looks out. The ice lake looks like a piece of night sky. It's fallen down and crashed. The car wanders, then stops. They carry him out, settle him on quilts. The nurses wrap him tight as a Christmas present. They put their fingers to their lips and say, listen. And all around he hears the ice breathing in and out, in and out. The lake sighs, and then it starts to hum. Kurt helps him crawl closer, and Heike guides his cheek to the ice. He can hear the bounce of his own blood jumping in his ears. Can you hear? Can you hear? There's a recording studio under the ice. That's what it's like. He can make out the bass, the drum beat, the shatter of cymbals. The ice is silver cracks like miniature lightning. These cracks ping at him from all directions, and when a crack finds him, it brings a note with it. First it sings the high notes, then it sings the low. He wants to take a piece of the singing ice back with him and lay it down in the relic box. On the way back, they keep talking to keep him awake. Kurt tells him the story of the ice. The colder the weather, he says, the louder the singing. And it was special tonight. But the patient is asleep and hasn't heard a thing. At the back door of the clinic, he rouses himself, though, and says, "Ask violins, I thank you." The boys lift his body and carry him to his room. His temperature keeps spiking and they can't get it down. They strip the snowsuit off him and call the emergency doctor. 2 days later, he's ready for the 11-hour flight home. He doesn't make it. He dies in a nearby country. His funeral is attended by, and reports vary, 30,000 to 100,000 mourners. There are readings from the Old Testament, from the Anaphora of St. John, and prayers in Amharic. There are musicians, dancers, prime ministers, and every kind of people. There is astonishing singing, spontaneous applause, and there is tear gas. Back at the clinic, when Heike clears his room, she slips the Delta bag beneath her tunic. And 6 months later, Kurt gets Vanka and they leave Rotok Egon forever. Heike too moves on, new jobs, new boys. And in one of those moves, she loses the sky blue Delta bag. But from time to time, when she needs money, she forges her famous patient's signature and sells it. And she always recognises her signatures whenever they pop up on online auctions. With the money, she says she's going to visit his island on the other side of the world one day. The clinic gets threatened with lawsuits and is investigated. It shuts down, then reopens with the young doctor as director. The clinic's protocols get attacked, but are no longer considered controversial, and many become like standard practice. The ice lake changes, the hard freezes are a thing of the past, and it thaws earlier and earlier. And they say 1981 was the last year the ice lake sang. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lindsay.
Thank you very much. Next, I'd like to introduce Goran Baba Ali, who will be reading an extract from his novel, The Glass Wall. Goran has written and published various literary and journalistic works in Kurdish, Dutch and English. The Glass Wall is his debut novel in the English language. He's also founder of the Afsana Press. As an ex-refugee, originally from Iraqi Kurdistan, he has personally experienced some of the protagonist's hardship in his novel, including a few weeks living in the desert.
I can promise to read it so beautifully, especially with my accent. I hope you'll understand me. So this story, The Glass Wall, it's about a young refugee, 19-year-old boy, who after a long journey through sea and a desert, surviving a boat capsize and walking 3-4 days through a desert, he comes to the city where he should be, but then he confronts with this immense glass wall, so he can't go through. He sees this beautiful, serene, safe, peaceful city on the other side, but he can't go through. And so I'm going to read from this moment when he is desperately shocked in front of the glass wall. He just had arrived with he lost his memory, tired, thirsty, hungry. It's a few pages into the story. He pressed on the glass with all his strength, then banged on it vigorously, not trembling, not even a slight quiver in the hard glass. Only a dull clang resonated, as if it was made of iron. He raised his fist again, but overtaken by a wave of nausea, leant on the wall, his head resting on his forearms. Pounding wouldn't help anyway, when there was no one on the other side to hear him. "Nothing will help, boy. Better go back," shouted a harsh, metallic voice from nowhere. The young man flinched, and turned, searching for the source of the voice. Nobody was inside. "I wouldn't waste your time here. Better go back home," cried the voice again, sounding as if it came from a radio buried somewhere in the sand. The young man jumped up and limped along the glass wall towards the voice, frowning. The man spoke his language in a strange yet comprehensible way. His voice clanged as if he was speaking into a tin. It was clear that it was not from a native speaker, so it must have come from the other side of the wall, of the glass. About 5 meters away, there was a small cement hut right behind the glass wall with an iron door to the street. Another few steps, and the young man came upon a hefty older man in a white shirt sitting in the hut behind the glass at a desk, peering into a large computer monitor. His grey eyes looked small behind his thick glasses that drooped over his nose. One hand clasped a mouse, whilst the fat fingers of his other hand spread over a keyboard. The young man took another step forward and put his forehead on the glass, careful not to hurt his wound again. The old man was surrounded by 3 bare walls and a low ceiling, with an iron door to his left. On the wall behind him stood a small white air conditioner. The 4th wall of the hut was the glass wall, standing between them. A set of blinds was rolled up under the ceiling. The man behind the glass addressed the young man without diverting his eyes from the monitor. "I would of course not want to meddle in your business, but I am warning you, whatever you try, you will not succeed. It's impossible to get in." The voice reached the young man through pinprick holes in the glass, arranged in a perfect order within a circle with a diameter of no more than 15 centimeters. On the other side of the glass, behind the holes, a bowl-shaped speaker was fixed with a microphone dangling from it. Under the holes, there was a horizontal slot about 30 centimeters long, but so narrow that only a single sheet of paper could slip through. The young man brushed his fingers over the holes and along the slot, bent his head, and held his ear close to the apertures. "Listen, young man," said the old man, his metallic voice coming now directly in the young man's ear, which made him recoil. At the same time, he heard the old man's own voice inside the cubicle, muffled and in another language. "The only way to be let in is to have a good story," the old man continued. The young man lifted his head and stared at the old man. What did he mean? "Here's the procedure," the old man added, releasing the mouse, bothering at last to look at the young man. He took off his glasses and said, You tell me your story, I type it into this computer and send it on to the authorities. It's up to them to decide whether you pass or not. If they allow you to come in, I open the door for you." The young man looked more closely at the glass between them. There was indeed a rectangular outline in the glass about 2 meters high and less than a meter wide. It was a glass door, held by a thin metal frame, hardly visible, no lock, and the glass was about 5 centimeters thick. He pushed on it, but the door didn't move. How was it possible? How could it be locked without a lock? He hammered on it with all his strength, but in vain. "Don't get agitated, boy. It's said to lock magnetically and can only be opened electronically. Only when your asylum request is granted will I get the code with which I can order the computer to open the door for you. But it's impossible to break it open, I'm telling you." The young man took a step back and saw his own faint reflection in the glass. Disheveled hair and a beard of a few weeks covered his bony chin and cheeks in a disorderly fashion. His tanned face was as dark as his arms, which stung from sunburn. The old man stared at him from the other side of the glass, as if waiting for some reply. And when you are through the door, the man started again. As there was no response from the young man, "You are not in yet." He leaned forward and pointed to the space in front of his desk. "Don't you see that you will end up inside the turnstile?" The young man looked. There was indeed an enormous iron turnstile right behind the glass. Why all this? Why don't they just let him in and then ask him questions or whatever they wanted? "Only me, with the push of this button," the old man said, moving aside, allowing the young man to see a large red button on the wall behind him. "You see it, don't you? Only I can open it for you. But before that, I need permission, of course. So come up with your story, I suggest." The man paused and scratched his almost bald head. He straightened, then slumped into his chair, which rolled back on its wheels, his large stomach dangling in his lap. He squinted at the young man, then continued, "You look like you want to try it anyway, my advice notwithstanding. Come on, try it then. Tell your story." He rolled himself forward on the chair, back to the desk, and bent over the keyboard. "But I warn you, it's really a waste of time. You will see. And boy, do something about that," he nodded at him, pointing to his wound. The young man pulled the dirty handkerchief out of the pocket of his worn trousers and wiped the blood from his forehead, looked at the handkerchief, then wiped his brow again. "Your chin too," the guard said, nodding. The young man watched his own reflection in the glass again and wiped his cheeks and chin, then returned the handkerchief to his pocket. He looked left and right. On either side, the glass was stretched as far as the eye could see. Did he really understand what this man was talking about? Should he believe him? Did this man behind the glass really mean what he said? Or was he laughing at him? Why would he? He might have said all of that to discourage him from trying. Or maybe he was just a confused old man whose task was only to guard the gate. Surely there must be someone else who could allow him through if this old man had indeed no authority. "Listen, boy," the guard said in the metallic voice, "I actually don't want to listen to you today. You have no idea how tired I feel." He then released the mouse and looked at the young man, who wearily leaned against the glass, his body already drooping with exhaustion. "You know," the guard continued, "I spent last time up till late, drinking, and now I can barely keep up my head. Let's do it tomorrow. But we can do first your formal intake now and register you as an asylum seeker. If you don't give up and go back, that is." He turned his gaze back to this. The young man said nothing. He didn't even know what to say. After a short silence, the guard peered at him again, then said, "You must be the last of your sort, boy. It's been over a year now since anyone has come here. They all know about this wall. How come you never heard of it?" He stopped for a moment, then started again. "Don't you see the glass? You see it, don't you? You really can't go over it. People have tried to penetrate this fortress, but no one has succeeded. They camped here for weeks and months, waiting to be let in, but their stories were rejected. They got angry and tried everything to get in. Look around. I don't know where they got all those huge rocks from, or how they extracted them from the endless desert. They tried to break the glass, but oh my, oh my." The young man turned his head and looked at the scattered litter and the stones. The wind had now dropped, the heat even stronger. He looked back to the man. How was it possible that he spoke his language so well? It was actually the loudspeaker talking to him. But to hear a stranger speak his mother tongue? But what was his mother tongue? And mother? Who was his mother? No answer came to mind, only a dizzying gap inside his head. It was pathetic, the guard continued. Though sometimes it was amusing to watch, he smiled. Then they tried something with really long tree branches. Where the hell they found those, I don't know. I think they had tried to make ladders so that they could maybe jump over the glass, you know. That was ridiculous, but also sad. You know how high it is? It's 130 meters tall. Who can jump over a wall of 130 bloody meters high? And some others tried to dig under it so they could tunnel themselves through to the side. But no way. The glass, let me tell you, is planted 5 meters into the ground and fixed to a concrete base. The guard turned his eyes to the monitor briefly, then looked back in the direction of the young man. It's unbreakable, really. You know, when they finished building it 2 years ago, they tested it by crashing it with a bulldozer at high speed. That didn't cause even a scratch. They showed it on the television, and it was everywhere in the papers and on internet. How come you know nothing about it? You cannot get through, boy. No way, really. The guard paused for a few moments, resting his chin in his hand, and advised the young man in a calm voice, I would go back before you become exhausted, as you already are. How? I don't know. But you have survived the desert coming here, so you can maybe return. Oh, and by the way, even this vast desert, even this is man-made. The young man turned and stared at the desert behind him again. He had spent a few long days and nights walking through it. What does he mean, man-made? What was this old mad man talking about? Oh, what a project, the metallic voice rose again behind the young man, making him turn to the old man again. The guard's own subdued voice sounded more sarcastic, amused almost. You know how long it took them? And oh, yes, and the mastermind of all this. You see that billboard over there? The guard nodded towards his right. The young man took a few steps to the left. There was indeed a huge billboard on the other side of the road, picturing the smiling face of a man. His blue eyes sparkled. His light blonde hair looked dyed. And what would that sentence say, written in large letters over the poster? Was the smiling man in the picture probably welcoming visitors to the city? I'm really worried about you, the metallic voice continued through the perforated circles of holes in the glass. Soon you'll be hungry and thirsty. I can't help, as you see. How long have you been on your journey, boy? I think I should stop here.
Thank you, Goran.
Thank you for listening.
And there's some books from Afsana Press here and other authors that are
Exactly.
reading
And
it.
at 10% discount on our Afsana Press books.
For those of you who don't know Darren Coffield, who runs this amazing place, the Colony Room, I'd like to introduce him to you all. Darren is an artist and author. He studied at Goldsmiths College, Camberwell School of Art and the Slade School of Art in London, where he received his bachelor's degree in 1993 in Fine Arts. He has exhibited at venues ranging from the Courtauld Institute, Somerset House to the National Portrait Gallery, London. His most recent books include Tales from the Colony Room, Soho's Lost Bohemia, 2021, and Queens of Bohemia and Other Misfits, 2024. Today, Darren will be reading to us from Queens of Bohemia, which presents some of the brilliant women of Soho in their own words.
This is a book that came about from the book I wrote on the Colony Room Club, so I realised I missed a trick when I wrote the last book, so it becomes explanatory as I read the introduction. So the introduction is, who are the Bohemians? Well, Bohemia is a term used for those who live unconventional lives. When the first Roman gypsies appeared in the 16th century France, they were all labelled Bohemian, and their nonconformist lifestyle and dress called the popular imagination. By the 20th century, a new generation of British women began rejecting with protection of the hierarchical family tradition, and fashioned themselves a new identity through the arts, and in doing so turned the idea of Victorian respectability on its head by becoming the new Bohemians. Current scientific theory suggests that the universe is held together by some underlying force that we do not recognise, called dark matter. Whilst finishing my biography, Tales from the Colony Room, Soho's Lost Bohemia, I realised that women were the dark matter holding Bohemia together and keeping its stars in their orbit. These women appear in numerous biographies and texts as individuals, but no one has attempted to write a book that shows how they all exist as contemporaries of each other, telling their own stories side by side. So I decided to compile an account of these extraordinary women to explain how these stars gravitated together. Some shone so brightly they burnt everyone around them, a few fell into decaying orbits, whilst others simply imploded. Despite being relegated to the role of bit actors by many art historians, these women occupied and often ruled London's Bohemia, a hard territory to place, yet familiar to its inhabitants, where friendship could mean more than family and diversity was accepted. Bohemia combined the districts of Fitzrovia and Soho, the last two remaining villages in London's West End. Always at the centre of immigrant life, Bohemia saw wave after wave of newcomers, making it an area steeped in social and cultural diversity. It proved an escape from the oppressive uniformity where exotic items and contraband could be sourced. Here women felt free from the narrow confines of a patriarchal society. Everyone from cross-dressers to unmarried mothers were accepted on their own merit. Bohemia was a giant jigsaw puzzle where a mass of misfits and other odd pieces that didn't fit into wider society would gather. Here you could live the life of a mistress, a muse, a hostess, a wife, a mother, an author, a free spirit, a worker, an artist, an entertainer, etc. Some of the roles were already in existence, but in Bohemia all of the boundaries blurred, and that was part of its appeal. Bohemia has a long association with artists, and it was the 18th century painter and co-founder of the Royal Academy of Arts, Angelica Kauffmann, who kicked off the trend. Bohemia offered women recognition as individuals at a time when they were controlled by men. Women couldn't open a bank account or obtain a passport without a man agreeing to act as a guarantor. However, many Bohemian women could afford to flout social conventions because they belonged to a wealthy landowning gentry. At the bottom of the social order were the female labourers and prostitutes, who worked hard for others. Above them was an intermediate layer of women, artists, models, actresses, singers and dancers, whose professions placed them at the edge of polite society. Although barriers of sex, class and gender clearly defined daily life, there fell away for the exceptionally talented and successful. For these women, Bohemia offered social mobility and a chance to move up the ladder. This motivated many working class girls to take up modelling for artists such as Augustus John and Jacob Epstein, who both seduced and betrayed them, since what was fun for a male artist often proved ruinous for a poor girl in search of a Prince Charming. At the time, the men were considered the serious creatives, and women merely muses who came down from their pedestals to do the housework. This stereotype began in 1894 with George du Maurier's best-selling novel Trilby, about a working-class model, Trilby O'Farrell, who falls in love with a posh Bohemian painter called Little Billy, and declares, "There's no place like the gutter for getting a clear view of the stars." The tear-jerking story of their doomed romance caught the popular imagination and affected the habits of many young women who began to call themselves bachelor girls. And one of the famous bachelor girls at the time, Viva King, said, "I had long yearned for the sort of studio life described in Trilby. I would gaze up the large windows and see myself among the crowds of artists and musicians whilst walking through Chelsea." Queens of Bohemia and Other Misfits begins in the 1920s, when suffragettes had fought hard for equality and nightclubs became the new social spaces where women could socialise unchaperoned. Kay Merrick's 43 Club on Gerrard Street scandalised society and inspired the creation of the Gargoyle Club, a hunting ground for femme fatales and film stars. This was the age of the dance craze and the arrival of the gender-bending flapper, a flat-chested, androgynous-looking female with boyish cropped hair who caused outrage by drinking, smoking and partying. Until then, a woman's pleasure was to be found in everyday banalities such as running the household and making a virtue of the acceptance of a woman's lot. By 1928, women obtained the right to vote and began making inroads towards equality for the next decade. Then, during the Second World War, women began taking over jobs and professions previously seen in male only. From factories and hospitals to the armed forces. The language some learnt at finishing school made them ideal contacts for secret agents, working with the resistance groups, whilst other women broadcast propaganda and produced literature, entertainment and even pornography as part of the war effort. Le Petit Club Français, which opened in 1940, was run by Owen Vaughan, who fed the French resistance and supported Soho's film industry with her groundbreaking documentary Boys. After the war, the Colony Room Club became Muriel Belcher's kingdom, and with her cheery fat catchphrase, "Hello, cunty," she inadvertently altered the course of British art by becoming a guru to a group of painters nicknamed Muriel's Boys: Francis Bacon, Lucian Freud, Frank Auerbach and Michael Andrews. Alongside the clubs were the numerous pubs run by women, each with its own collection of eccentrics. Annie Orchard's Fitzroy Tavern was where the Bohemian enclave of Fitzrovia derived its name. And a little further down the road was the Wheat Sheaf run by Mona Glendenning. Across Oxford Street into Soho proper was Victorienne and Victor Borlemont's French House pub, then known as the York Minster, and Ali Bailon's Coach and Horses. These landladies presided over their establishments like circus trainers, uncertain of what the wild beasts in their domain might do next. Women such as the tiger woman Betty May, known for her taboo baking ways, and the artist Nina Hamnet, nicknamed the Queen of Bohemia, whose patroness Princess Violet ran an opium den in a decommissioned submarine. Then there was Sonia Orwell, nicknamed the Euston Road Venus, who became the model for and heroine for Julia in George Orwell's novel 1984, and her friend Isabel Rawsthorne, who was an artist, spy, pornographer, model and muse for some of the greatest artists of the 20th century, including Picasso, who she considered not a man any woman in her right mind should care for. Other women turned their homes into social spaces. The art down in the Birmingham Smith's 155 Salon became the social fulcrum for the post-war art crowd, where you'd find the prototype rock and roll wild child Henriette Moret's, much loved and painted by Francis Bacon. For those who preferred sobriety, a simultaneous cafe society existed, where one could find the misfits such as the Countess, who ruled the bins of Bond Street, the mighty mannequin Joan Rhodes, who developed a strong woman act, bending iron bars, and their effeminate gender-bending friend, Quentin Crisp. As the 1950s gave way to the 1960s, the traditional Bohemian world was absorbed by the espresso bar explosion, an invasion of coffee shops where youths gathered and British rock and roll was born. Bohemia became youth culture, musicians replaced artists, and muses now inspired music. Some of the queens of Bohemia identify with the cross-dressing heroines of Elizabethan culture. Adopting the appearance of a girl as a survival strategy, they blended the roles of boy and girl, man and woman, king and queen. Bohemian women and gay men had an affinity. Women's rights and gay liberation became entwined, since they were fighting for similar freedoms. Making love could lead to a criminal conviction, since abortion and homosexuality were both illegal. For a homosexual to admit their sexuality was career suicide, and for a creative woman to entertain having children was to potentially consign oneself to a female ghetto. Although the contraceptive pill became available in the 1960s, it would take many more years for abortion and homosexuality to be decriminalised. Female fear of sex and horror of their own bodies was best summed up by the pop artist Pauline Boty, who said she thought she had an ugly cunt. Many did not feel comfortable with their biology. George Jameson gravitated to Soho and hung out at the Fitzroy Tavern before transitioning to April Ashley, one of the first Britons to undergo sex reassignment surgery. Bohemian women also posed political, moral and existential challenges to authority and gave rise to a new way of living. Many were trailblazers, part of a dramatic wider shift in society. In this book we explore the complex dynamics of creative lives and concentrate on the gaps, the silences, extrapolating and triangulating some of the poorly documented lives. By revisiting unsound judgments and refreshing the eras of art history that academia alone cannot reach, I am attempting to establish not the fact, but the truth of what happened. Since ancient history, women have had a difficult time of being listened to. The Sphinx talked in riddles, Cassandra was fated to see the truth and not be believed, and St. Paul told the Corinthians that women should not speak in church. William Shakespeare wrote that a soft and gentle voice was an excellent thing in a woman, but except for Queen Elizabeth I, Public voices of women in his day were non-existent. The Elizabethan women who tried to speak up for themselves were often gagged with an iron muzzle. In our enlightened era, a woman with a gag has become a staple of hardcore pornography. But there is more than one way to rob a woman of her voice. The problem with writing a wide-ranging historical account is that women often take their husband's surname, and if a woman remarries many times, her various surnames obscure her identity, making her life difficult to follow. To solve this problem and make sure their story is clear and comprehensible, I have generally stuck to the one name they were best known by. Using a technique known as oral history, I have used previously unpublished memoirs and eyewitness accounts to fill the gaps of historical vision, and a montage of quotes and fragments of published biographies to create a soundscape of voices, as if one were in the room listening to them talk. It also gives the reader a flavour of what it was like to be part of their Bohemia, so exotic and yet occasionally rank with urine and despair. Queens of Bohemia and Other Misfits is an affectionate rescue of many remarkable women from virtual obscurity, taking personalities time has unfairly dismissed and bringing a fresh perspective on things past, sometimes meant including obscure figures at the expense of the conventionally important ones. To capture the essence of the female experience of Bohemia, their individual portraits merge into vignettes and bleed out into broad vistas. So let us go back over 100 years to the early 20th century, to a Britain where ideas of duty, sacrifice and the greater good had been debunked by the horrors of the First World War, to a new flapper generation of women whose morality resided in being true to oneself and not to a cause, as they took the struggle for freedom into their personal lives and learned to value their individuality along the way. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Darren. Thank you very much, everyone. We're going to take a 15-minute break, and then we'll listen to our 4 remaining writers. And Darren's book is available behind the bar, so just go and check it out if you're interested. Okay.
Okay, I'd like to introduce Miki Lentin. Miki completed an MA in creative writing at Birkbeck in 2020 and was finalist in the 2020 Irish novel for his first novel, Winter Sun. He's been highly placed in competitions, including the Fish Publishing Shop Memoir, Brick Lane Bookshop Award, and lots of other things. Okay, he's reading from Winter Sun, his new novel.
Thank you. So this is my book, Winter Sun, which is published by Afsana Press. I'm going to read 3 relatively short extracts from it, just to give you a bit of background, so you know what's going on before I dive in. This is a book based on a holiday I went on with my father in 2005 to Tenerife, one of the Canary Islands, and in the book my father is called Abba, which is father in Hebrew. So if I mention the word Abba, at least you'll know what I'm talking about. So also within the book there are it's structured around 9 days of the holiday that we went on, and at the beginning of each chapter there's an excerpt from a letter that my father wrote to me when I was a teenager. So that's the first excerpt that I'm going to read, which is an excerpt from the letter that he wrote to me when I was around 19 or something. Listen, it's after 11 and I still have to read plays by Mamet for a lecture at Trinity College. I explained that I'd only done Glengarry Glen Ross, as you will remember, but they seem to regard me as some kind of damn expert, which I'm not, but I'd like to be. And yes, before I forget, I do have It All Adds Up by Saul Bellow, but I don't think I've read it. You should try reading some of the others like The Dangling Man and Herzog, which is one of my favourites of his. Did you know that my copy is signed by the great man himself, pissed as he was one evening at a book signing in London? So I asked him to sign my copy that I'd brought especially. If you're lucky, I'll let you borrow it, but please be kind enough to send it back when you're done. Gaps in shelves don't look good. Mind you, neither does a pissed writer. The next excerpt I'm going to read is just from sort of a moment in the hotel that we're staying in Tenerife when I see my father shaving in the bathroom. I should say, actually, he was very elderly when I went on this holiday with him. You know, that will sort of help to make some sense of some of this. I stood in the doorway to the bathroom and watched Abba lather his face. Condensation covered the mirror as steam rose from the sink. His razor shook in his hand as it bounced on his skin, removing patches of shaving cream, leaving a few specks of blood behind. Moving towards him, I gently uncurled his fingers from the razor and took it from him. With the forefinger and thumb of my other hand, I pinched and stretched his skin taut, loosening the tension and gently opening the pores, just like he taught me. I stood behind Abba as I worked, and holding his hand in mine, my belly pushed against his back. Keeping my fingers on his skin, I ran the blade against the coarse hairs on his cheeks and chin, slicing through the cream methodically, gradually exposing his features. His cheeks were heavy and sagging as if he was carrying something in them. His nose was straight, bulbous at the tip, his lips full. After every glide of the razor, I knocked it against the inside of the sink, releasing the residue of the cream and sliced hair that floated in the water. Pursing his mouth closed, I shaved under his nose, careful not to catch the blade on his lips, then hovered it over his head and around his ears to trim any stray hairs. The thickness of the emollient filled my nostrils. I was 6 when I sliced open my cheeks while shaving. I don't know why I did it. Abba found me standing silently in the bathroom, blood dripping onto the floor from my face. I gripped the worn wooden handle of his razor, unable to let it go. I didn't cry. He removed the razor, pressed his warm hands on my cheek, and buried me into his chest. As I finished shaving him, he closed his eyes. I proceeded to massage the leftover cream into his cheeks, pressing my thumbs against the shaving nicks, and circling my fingers first around his eyes, then under his nostrils, followed by his jaw and across the front and back of his neck. At that moment, I didn't want to let go of his clean, smooth skin in my rough hands. And the last bit I'm going to read is, as the book develops, I develop a friendship with the holiday rep, who's a guy called Richard, and we go on a pub crawl in Tenerife, which is great fun, and this is an excerpt from that pub crawl scene. "Fucking hell, there you are," a bare-chested Richard shouted in my ear as I returned to the bar. "I've been looking everywhere for you. I've a duty of care and all that, for my customers, you know." He smelled of coconut oil. "Having fun?" he asked. "Yeah, it's great," I said half-heartedly. "Come on, dance with us," Richard grabbed my arm. "I'm not much of a dancer." "You don't have to be, it's just a good laugh." "I'm fine," I said, wanting the conversation to end, my head cloudy. "Well, if you're not going to dance, you and me are having shots." Richard pushed his way to the front of the bar. 2 shot glasses arrived on a silver tray. A blue flame circled the rim of the glass as it was lit by the barman, who motioned me to drink. Following Richard, I covered the glass with my hand to extinguish the flame and knocked it back. A burnt, sweet, alcoholic taste of caramel filled my throat like an oaky syrup. "Woohoo!" Richard called, slapping me on the back as I coughed. "Are you trying to kill me?" "Jaeger bomb, Tenerife style, ha-ha." I rested my elbows on the bar. "You're very serious," Richard said, edging closer. I pretended not to hear him. "Something's going on between you and your dad, isn't it?" I shook my head. "Come on, you can talk to Uncle Richie. Your secret's safe with me." "There's nothing to tell. We're on holiday. He's old. What more do you want me to say?" "Suit yourself. Usually when people come on their holidays, they arrive all wound up. I see it all the time. But after a few days in the sun, I'm telling you, they're much more relaxed. You two, though, you two are different. You seem to be getting more miserable." "You try and talk to him then," I said. But as I spoke, he turned to a girl who had whipped off his baseball cap off his head. I recognised her from the hotel, Ines, the cleaning lady, still wearing her pristine white trainers and holding her cracked mobile phone. They raised their eyes to me briefly as they talked, laughing with each other as they flicked through photos on their phones, an air of familiarity between them. I left them. As I walked through a sea of bodies, my sandals crunched on broken glass and plastic cups. Kicking a few empty bottles of Smirnoff Ice that spun across the dance floor, I stood in the centre of the club and stopped. I closed my eyes. Joe was dancing in a circle with a few other lads, lightly bumping into me. A crowd edged aside as they danced in taunting circles. As the music intensified, I separated Joe's arm from the group and joined them. Gripping onto his shoulders, we careered and jumped in unison. Lifting my knees up to my chest, I used Joe and the other lad on my other side to hoist me higher and higher, so I was now hovering over the ground, as if the music was sweeping me away. Some of the lads separated and started dancing alone or with some girls, but Joe and I continued. Arm in arm, we swung and twisted each other, spinning furiously, strobe lights blending and blurring into one laser light spotlight on us. Eventually I stopped, breathless, unable to focus, sweat dripping into my eyes and mouth, my head spinning as if it might come away from the rest of my body. I approached Joe and stood facing him closely for a few minutes, my ears pounding, my eyes wide, his stubbly face in my line of sight. I am fucking Irish, I said aggressively, before turning and walked away. The night air had cooled by the time I left Veronica's. The waves were breaking close to the shore. Pockets of revellers were milling outside the clubs, some shouting and screaming, others fiddling with cards and cash points, and a few sitting on the edge of pavements, heads between their legs. It was a short walk back to the Hotel Optimist, the salty sea air filling my lungs, the sounds of croaky karaoke drifting in the wind. I slid across the marble floor of the bright hotel reception and noticed Abba by the entrance to the bar, reading The World of Yesterday by Stefan Zweig. "Ah, you're back," he said. "Why are you still up?" I asked, surprised to see him. "It's nearly 3 a.m. "I thought I'd wait up for you. I was about to go to bed," he said, putting down his book. "I met a marvellous couple, the O'Dwyers, I think they were called. Not sure. They invited me to dinner in the hotel." "That's nice of them," I said. "I had paella. I thought we were going to have that on our last night." "Ah, to hell with it. I didn't fancy anything else." "Any good?" "A bit dry." "I'm going to bed," I yawned, my head still pounding. "We had a great conversation," Abba said as he picked up a brandy from the coffee table in front of him. I wondered how much he'd had to drink. "They agree with me." "About what?" "About Israel." "Great," I said, and ran my hand over my head, pitying the O'Dwyers, who probably thought they were doing a nice thing by inviting an old man alone to have dinner with them. Abba finished his drink. "Right, I'm off to bed." I watched him waddle to the lift, his flip-flops flapping on the shiny floor, waving at the receptionist as he went. I followed him to the next lift, not wanting to be his presence for a few moments. On floor 3, I found him wandering like a lost soul, flailing the walls for support as he walked down the wrong corridor, fumbling in his back pocket for the key card to the apartment, his chinos flapping against his legs. Not wanting to surprise him, I walked up behind him quietly, held onto his arm and turned his body around, whilst holding onto his bloated waist. He moved with me as if he knew that I'd find him and help him. His cheeks were flushed, his lips stained red, his breath garlicky. We walked arm in arm along the low-ceilinged corridor back to our room, safely enclosed by the walls, doors and flickering strip lights. I helped Abba remove his stained blue sweatshirt and trousers, from which I picked off a few grains of dried rice. Lifting his legs one by one, I laid him onto his bed and covered him in a freshly starched white sheet. He fell asleep immediately. I downed a couple of paracetamol and lit a cigarette. The smoke lifted me as I inhaled. My eyes danced over the page of Herzog as I tried to read, turning the pages quickly, trying to sober up by focusing on a few words here and there. After a few pages, my mind slowed, and I began to concentrate on the print, really concentrate, as if I wanted to devour what he was saying so that I could remember it in the morning, even though I knew that I was drunk and that anything I read or thought of now would be gone, well gone by the time I woke up. Part of me wanted to drop the book and go back to the club, to Richard, to Ines, to the bar and just forget about it all, but I had to keep on going. I had an urge to lick the print so I could eat it up, take it all in, all the pain and suffering Herzog was feeling, and let it surge into me so that I could understand what he was going through. And if I did that, maybe I'd understand Abba, and maybe I'd understand myself. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that, Miki. Next, we're going to hear from Martin Nathan. who some of you will know is my co-host at Story Radio. Martin's short fiction and poetry has appeared in a range of journals, and his novel, A Place of Safety, is published by Salt Publishing. His dramatic writing has been shortlisted for the Nick Dark Award and the Woodward International Prize. Over to you.
Okay, this is called Red Herring. Are you closing? I said as I arrived at the shop. It was only 4 o'clock, but Mr. Rock was already bringing his sign in from the street. It was hard to make out the lettering because of the scratches, but you wouldn't visit the place unless you already knew what was inside. I've been closing for 50 years, he said, and looked down the road for a rush of customers. He raised his shapka to wipe his brow, and I thought he was going to tell me again about the road widening scheme that had threatened the shop, but he shook his head. We stepped back to let a woman in a shower door push her buggy past and retreated into the shop. He straightened the certificate from the Beth Din and moved the tin of tomatoes to hide the inspection date. He impressed me with his battles with the council over the years, but the last time he told me if they'd made him a half-decent offer, he said it had gone without a second thought. He said he wasn't sentimental about the area, but then he started talking about the days when he'd sold more stock in an hour than he sold in a week now. They used to complain about the queues blocking up the road. They used to sell live chickens round the corner in the Hessel Street Market, and their blood used to run down the gutters. It was filthy and it stank. There were flies everywhere. No one wants that anymore. They've moved away all the Jewish population. They've gone to Essex, North London, as far away from this place as they can get, I should think. The garment shops, bakers and restaurants had gone. When Bloom's in Oldgate shut, it made the front page of the Jewish Chronicle. His voice was weaker and more guttural than usual. He sipped some cold coffee and I felt bad because I hadn't visited for so long. We had issues to resolve. You're a young man, you've got other fish to fry, I should think, he chuckled. We both looked at the mounds of fried halibut on his counter. It was not cheap stuff, thick chunks of matzah meal and big balls of chopped fish, stacks of latkes and more varieties of smoked fish than I'd ever seen. It made me anxious to calculate the value of his stock. I wondered who bought it all. I was often the only customer and found myself buying too much. Despite the discount he said he gave me, I always spent way more than I'd intended. How's business? He gave a non-committal nod, and the cat yowled as the stack of unwashed pans it was walking over collapsed. It hid behind the pickle barrels. The last time I visited, he'd been miserable. The work was too much for him, he said. Getting up at 4 for the markets, if he had any sense, it'd have closed the place years ago. I told him how important it was to keep shops like his going, how people were getting more interested in food, and his business could start to boom with the right publicity. He took his hat off and his scalp glistened, crowned by his remaining hair. The thing is, my food has got that old-fashioned taste, he said. No one knows the difference anymore. They buy everything at supermarkets. So it won't matter when I'm gone. A place like this needs the right person to take it over. I'll gladly train them up, show them the ropes. It inspired me. I pictured myself standing beside that till. I'd go to the market with him, learn how to make pickles, how to cook the fish, the latkes. I was interested, I told him. I'd go and think about it and get back to him. You do that, he said, and something about it seemed to amuse him. The idea churned over in my head. I tried to make it work. I thought about what I could do with the place without losing its identity. I couldn't see how he was surviving. I had a child about to be born. How could I take a chance like this now? Everything told me it would be a disaster. I felt bad. I led him on. I resisted going back to tell him. We went into his kitchen at the back and he made me some coffee. He told me he'd been closed for a month. He was playing poker and realised he couldn't pee anymore. He had to have his prostate cut out. Want some advice? He said. Don't bother getting old. I told him I was a father now. My daughter had been born a couple of months earlier, and I had a photograph in my pocket that I showed everyone. I didn't show him. I'll bring her in next time. Don't leave it too long, he said. You always say that. I felt sad that my daughter would never visit places like this. Mr. Rock didn't have children. He'd been a bit of a tearaway with his gambling and drinking, he said, but that was all behind him now. He pressed his furry hat down, and with his round belly, he had the demeanour of a grumpy cartoon bear. He lit the gas under the frying pan full of oil. I need to start cooking. Why don't I use the front ring? I said. He turned on the front ring, and a sheet of blue flame covered the top of the cooker. He turned it off again. See? Never use the front ring. The shop was part of a world that was slipping away fast as London cleaned itself up for a new age. It was a niche business in the wrong place, selling foods no one recognised anymore. My mouth still puckered at the memory of the red herring he gave me. That'll give you blood pressure, he said, as I chewed fish so salty my heart raced. He'd sold buckling with its guts intact, bloater still raw inside. Everything needed an overhaul. The brickwork was cracked and had lavender growing out of it. This business operated with post-it notes stuck on a manual till. I was about to tell him my decision, but I wavered. Perhaps I could make it work. Canary Wharf was just down the road. I could deliver lunches there, get some publicity. I looked around the kitchen, thought about where the sink and the new cooker would go. He went back into the shop. A man was collecting for the mosque, and Mr. Rugg was explaining the food to him. Then a Rolls Royce parked outside, and a white-head man in a dark suit came in. Mr. Rugg began wrapping food, and the till was ringing. When I went back in the shop, the counters had been cleared, all except for bloaters and red herrings. He wrapped up a last piece of halibut for me. He seemed cheerful as he wrote down the sales in his book, so I decided to tell him now. I've been thinking about what we discussed last time, I began, about me taking over the place. He looked up and stopped writing. I stopped talking, not sure what I was going to say. Why would you want to take over a place like this, he said and grimaced as he rubbed his hip. I've got someone who wants to buy it. He wants to turn it into a chemist. I put the fish in my bag and bought some new green pickled cucumbers. The only thing I wanted to do in my life now was run this shop. I took a photo of him in front of the till. I'll be back soon with my daughter, I said. It was nearly a year later that the local paper reported that the road widening scheme that had blighted the area had finally been cancelled. I decided to visit once more. I walked the length of the street twice, struggling to get my bearings. Then I realised the shop had gone, and I was standing in front of a chemist. Its bright, clean interior gleamed with white light. I went inside and found the entrance to the old kitchen. I stood in the spot where Barry Rogg had stood and leant on his till. I thought what might have been, it would have been a disaster. I looked around the shelves, everything sealed up, labelled and barcoded. Cowpole, nappy cream, wet wipes. Then I remembered the things my daughter needed and went up to the counter.
Thank you.
See you now.
Yes, me now.
Okay. Right, now good to hear from Tabitha Potts, founder and co-host of the Story Radio podcast. Tabitha is a short story writer and novelist and has been published in various literary magazines and anthologies. She received honourable mention in the Alpine Fellowship Writing Prize for her story Poppet and is publishing her debut novel in 2026 with Ryan Prose Publishing.
So this one's called The Destructive Element. It's not published, just something I'm working on. I remember so little from the past. Some moments are dulled through much handling, some I can't bear to touch, some are bright and gem-like, and others ring hollow. We stood in the shallows. I was in my swimsuit, and my sister was in her smocked dress, with bare feet and a rubber ring around her waist. We moved forward into the deeper water, beyond the surf. We whispered to each other. I told her she was safe, and I would teach her how to swim. The sea soaked into her dress, which was dark brown, with white lace at the wrists. I was holding her hand, but the water was getting deeper, and when my father saw us, he came running and pulled her out. I was sent to my room as punishment. That night, I dreamed of the dark sea, its suck and pull, the floating weed. I remember we would start walking on the sandy beach near the pier, where the breakwaters stretched out into the distance. The sun would be low in the sky, with a pinkish tint that would blur into lilac and orange as it started to dip below the horizon. We would walk out barefoot, and the sand lay in bars below our feet, crumbling as we stepped on it. Everywhere were casts where lugworms were hiding below the surface. There were little lacy streamers of bright green seaweed. I don't remember shells, though I've collected so many over the years, sitting in glass jars gathering dust. Here it was, just the radiant sky, the feathered clouds, the setting sun, the crunch of our footsteps into the yielding sand, and the urge to reach the sea as it withdrew further and further, leaving just puddles of water between the bars of sand, reflecting the sky as you walked across them, something my mother must have loved as much as I did, because she gave me a painting of those bars of sand, the water between them, and the reflection of that sky. Once I went far too far out. It was a very hot day, and the woman who was supposed to be looking after me disappeared. Perhaps she got bored and went back to the beach. I don't know. I wasn't afraid. I remember enjoying the strange echoes and the coolness below the pier as I floated on my back. But the current was strong. I don't remember being rescued, but I remember a man, not my father, jumping up from his beach towel with a shout. My mother told me a story about an artist friend of hers when I was 16 or so. As she got older, she started losing her looks, my mother told me. Before her 48th birthday, she put on her best leopard print coat and full makeup. She bought a train ticket to the seaside. Then she walked into the sea. I didn't question this story when I was 16. It made perfect sense to me that you would want to die when you were that old. Even more, that you would wish to do so stylishly. I'm 5 years older now than that woman was when she died, and I can imagine many other things that made her take that final walk, but I no longer believe it was her lost beauty or the memories of long ago lovers that tormented her so. That artist painted a portrait of my mother once, rescued decades ago from a skip outside our flat where my father had thrown it. I saw it for the first time up on the wall in my brother's sitting room. My mother sat in an armchair, dark eyes glittering. The artist captured her sitter's physical likeness, the dolly bird mask, but added her own melancholy, my mother wrote in the artist's catalogue. I wonder if that was true. Thank you so much, everyone. So last but very much not least, we have a reading from Simon Roberts. Simon is currently based in West London and writes short stories and flash fiction. He was longlisted for the 2022 Fish Short Story Prize. Simon also writes for the theatre. His adaptation of Patrick Hamilton's 1947 novel, The Slaves of Solitude, was produced by the Questors Theatre in 2024. His story Dirty Chicken and Rice was a finalist in the Plaza Prizes short story competition 2024. You can also hear it on Story Radio podcast, where it was one of our most popular episodes. Thank you so much.
So, this story needs a little bit of context. It's called Goats, not Ghost, Goats. The story you're about to hear, it's one of a series of stories I wrote inspired by the Watts Memorial in Postman's Park, which some of you might know, which is sort of between St Paul's and Barbican. So the Watts Memorial is named for the Victorian artist George Frederick Watts. He established the memorial in 1900. It's a memorial to self-sacrifice. It consists of several ceramic plaques, 54 in total, each dedicated to the man, woman or child who died in their attempts to save someone's life. So the oldest plaque, chronologically, is that of somebody called Sarah Smith, who was 17 years old at the time. So her stage name was Sarah, her actual name was Sarah Smith, her real name was Sarah Gibson. She was a dancer and pantomime artiste. So, it's late January 1863. We're at the Princess Theatre, Oxford Street. The narrator of this story is Ada Edison, who was another dancer, and she was a friend of Sarah's. So, you're new, so you need to know what happened here not long back, right here at the Princess. Listen up. A couple of hours before curtain up, Bliss and me were in the wings spying on Sarah and this old goat. Silk hat, emerald turtles, tash stiff with wax. Getting well acquainted they was. He was using his cane to pull Sarah against him. You what? Turtles? Turtle doves. Gloves. Who the hell's he, Ada? Bliss whispers. Goat, I says. A randy old goat. Wait till her mother finds out, Bliss says. Find out? Ma Gibson's made up. Can smell the sovereigns beneath the sulphur, that one. Been in the 8 Bells since Thursday, drinking their health. The goat must have heard that, because he suddenly leaves off smooching and looks right at us. So I looks at him back. Real steely. Didn't seem to faze him. He winks at me. Real slow. Evil it was. I blows him a raspberry and grabs hold of Bliss. Come on, Bliss, let's practice. Stop gawping. Ain't he handsome, Bliss says. For a goat, that is. I pulls her onto the stage between 2 of the firepan stands. Don't you say nothing to Sarah about goats, I tells her, as we rehearse the dance again. You know her temper. Poor Sarah. She had a terrible temper. But you know what? Back in the dressing room, it's me what has a go. You want to watch it, sir? He's old enough to be your dad. He's a respectable man of business, Sarah says, all pussy knickers. Twirly, tash, swirly, stick, a regular stage villain. Bloody nerve you've got, Ada. You'll never guess what I says to that. There'll be the devil to pay, I says. The devil. Bliss is pretending to fiddle with her straps, but I know she's all ears, because she pipes up and asks Sarah, like butter wouldn't melt, who was the giddiest goat, him or her? Sarah goes right up to her. I thought she was going to clout her one. You know why they calls you Bliss, she says. Why do you think? Bliss says. Because I'm ignorant. Stupid. Then Roxby puts his head round the door, you know, like he does, gives the half, scuttles off like a rat. Oi, I says, going after him. I've got one word to say to you. Skirts. But he's vanished. Like all men when you need them for something. When was our skirts last dipped, sir? I asks. Ages ago they was treated, weren't it? She's too busy gazing at herself in the mirror. Sir! Oh, Ada, I don't know. What matters is how they look under the lights. What he thinks of me sitting up there in his box. Yeah, all high and mighty. You're only jealous. You don't even know him. Never mind, lover boy. What's Roxby's game? He's being a penny-pinching bastard, Bliss says. She starts babbling on about something terrible that happened at Drury Lane. I read about it in the Standard. I read about it, I says back. Hear that, sir? Bliss is no longer ignorant. How's that for a headline? And we all laugh and go on ribbing her till Roxby calls beginners and off we go. In the wings, Bliss folds her arms against the cold. We're all skin and bone, but Bliss, she's thin as a twig. She's standing there gazing at the flames in the fire pans, flicker green and red, listening to them hiss and spit. Sarah cozies up to her, rests her chin on Bliss's shoulder. Sorry, Bliss, she says. You know we're only teasing. We don't mean nothing by it. It's just nerves. Forget it. I'd do anything for you, Bliss. Like what? Anything. I mean that. Only Bliss shrugs her off. And then, get this, Sarah says, reckon tonight will be the one? The night to end all nights? Oh, Sarah, give over, I says. You say that every bloody night. But will it? Blimey, show any more leg and it probably will be, I says. Tommy, rapping his baton, shuts us up. I know, we're supposed to call him Mr. Thomas, but we call him Tommy because he's full of Tommy rot. The bands start up with all their trilling, booming and scraping, and it's our cue, so on we dance. Into the light, and the cat calls, and And it all happens very sudden. Same as what Bliss said happened at Drury Lane. What happens is this. I clock Sarah out the corner of my eye. She's glancing at the box nearest the stage. I glance up too. There's the emerald turtles stretching out in applause from the blackness. And they go on applauding as one of the sparks from the pans flies onto the hem of Bliss's dress, and I mean, Christ, she goes up in an instant, and Sarah throws herself onto Bliss to put out the fire, only she... Give me a mo, will you? I used to go and visit Bliss. Not no more. I can't stomach the sight of her. Except it's not her so much I can't stomach as what happens when I turn away from what's left of her and close my eyes. I see those turtles. Those bright green turtles hammering together, and I hear how she screams, and I hear how he shouts for more, and I see Sarah in hell is what I see. Sarah. No, I'm all right. I'm all right. Roxby's to blame, of course. Them skirts hadn't been dipped in months. Penny pinching bastard. Just like that ignoramus Bliss said he was. That goat. The way he winked and clapped and went on clapping. And then there's all the other goats like him, winking and clapping and worse to come, whatever their frippery or finery or the time of day or the time of year or the time full stop, and nothing but a load of bloody Tommy Rock to sing us up to heaven, or heaven knows where. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Simon, and thank you for reading last. I'd just like to
Thanks for that.
thank everyone. Can we have a round of applause for everyone who came to read for us tonight? It's been amazing. We're hoping to make this a regular event, so we'd like to come back hopefully in 2 months' time. Do follow us. We're on www.storyradio.org, and also if you submit a short story for us, because I know there are some writers here, do just let us know in the subject line or the email whether you'd like to read us at the Colony Room Green as well. Don't forget to visit the books table and support all the authors who've read for us tonight. Thanks for listening, and good night.
Thanks, Story Radio.
I forgot to say thank you to Darren for providing us with this amazing venue. It's been an absolute joy to read here. I hope you've all enjoyed it as much as I have. Thank you.